Well, greetings class, and welcome to week 4 of Counseling 4306, Wisdom Literature, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Taught under the umbrella of biblical counseling. As you know, the 3 things that make biblical counseling unique are the sufficiency of Scripture, progressive sanctification, and the Bible's instructions on how to grow and change. This course is an opportunity for you to practice all 3 of these principles in your personal life and prepare you for counseling in the future. This is a summary of the grading policy. The assignments haven't changed. There's journaling on everything that you read or ingest in any way, listening or watching videos. Discussion boards, papers due each week, quizzes most weeks, special assignments most weeks, and a final paper that you're going to be turning in on the 8th week. As you know, Arlington has now started doing pluses and minuses on their grades, so that this table I included every week just to remind you how to determine what your grade is going to be. And this is a 50,000-foot view of all of the assignments. There's journaling every week, quizzes 5 out of the 8 weeks, discussion boards 7 out of the 8 weeks, and special assignments in 7 out of the 8 weeks. And then the final exam, which is again a larger paper than you've been doing each week. I've also included this table from the syllabus that shows what topic we're doing each week. Week 1 we did the fear of the Lord, then we did moral purity, last week we did money, this week we're doing communications, next week will be parenting, child training, and then we'll have 3 weeks to go through the entire book of Ecclesiastes. Each week we do this short video to review last week's homework, look at this week's assignments, and take a sneak peek at next week's assignments. Every week there's reading to be done from the notes from Dale Canwright's lectures that he did in the past to the text of the scripture in this case, and the commentary from Dr. Constable. And then some other resources sometimes from ACBC certified teachers and authors. Every week we'll journal and discuss about the things that we're reading, and there's quizzes every single week, a weekly paper and a weekly special assignment, which is really another paper, and then the final exam on week 8. So last week the topic was one of my favorites, money. The reading assignment was to read Proverbs 1 through 15 again. You had completed that back in week 1. And then to read the third 20% chunk, so you're now over halfway through reading Dr. Constable's commentaries on Proverbs. And you were to examine 3 financial websites, Christian financial websites, all 3 of which I am a fan of, Crown Financial Ministries and Compass Finances God's Way. Not a lot of difference between the 2 in my opinion, having worked closely with both of them and doing financial counseling for both organizations. And then Dave Ramsey, of course, probably the most well-known of those 3, the best marketed of those 3. And I hope you enjoyed learning all the tools that are there and available for you to help people. Dale Canwright's notes were in a Word document, and we covered those last week in this video, as well as, of course, you're supposed to read them. And the discussion board was an application of your favorite financial proverbs, as well as confessing to us where you are on the baby steps or the money map, whichever you prefer to use. And then there was a 2-page paper on counseling a couple that was in a financial mess. I got some comments on how you did on that. And a special assignment where you had a 2-page paper on secular pro-debt articles. We went over the 7 baby steps and the 7 destinations of the money map and their similarities last week. And we looked at giving and stewardship versus ownership, and some couple of case studies that were in Dell's notes. And then there were a handful of proverbs that I drew your attention to that would be useful for the papers and the discussions that you had last week. The discussion board was to post a brief comment on your favorite proverb dealing with money and how you're currently applying that proverb in your own financial situation. and to reference which of Dave Ramsey's baby steps or Crown Compass money map destinations you are currently working on. Thoroughly enjoyed reading every word of that, where the four of you are in that journey. And happy to see that all of you are at least verbally attempting to apply these principles and make some progress in that area in the near future. Then paper number 3 was to write a 2-page response on how you would deal with this situation, a husband and wife being deeply in debt. Their pastor thought it was so bad he recommended bankruptcy, but wanted them to talk to you first. And your counsel was going to weigh heavily on them. So a couple of things, and I also asked you to make sure you included the key elements of biblical counseling. Now, in future papers where you're writing about this, I want you to be very explicit about when you're applying each of these 6. Most of you did that. At least one of you, it was difficult for me to map where you were doing those things. They were all kind of entangled together. You didn't use words like involvement or hope in your description. So I had to evaluate that and extrapolate that. And I thought you hit most of them pretty obviously, but a couple of them not so much. So please be more explicit about that. Some of you even made that your outline and say, here's how I'm going to be building involvement, here's how I'm going to be sharing biblical hope. Makes it much easier for me to grade, more inclined to give you a higher grade. So I liked that approach. You were also asked to Google the word debt and choose an article from a non-Christian perspective that was pro-debt. Some of you picked out Schwab and Forbes and some big names in money management. And then you were to analyze that through a biblical lens. All of you saw the Proverbs 22:7 verse as the borrower is the lender's slave as a key verse to use in analyzing that. And this was yet another summary of that. Actually, this is feedback for you on these things. So on the special assignments, I did enjoy the pro-debt articles that you referred to, and the proverbs that you used to debunk them. That was good. Some of you seem to miss the fact that all scripture references to debt are negative. There are no positive biblical scriptures to support any of those pro-debt articles. Those are all secular ideas. I don't want to overstate that either. There's no commandment that says thou shalt not borrow, and furthermore, you are commanded to lend. So if borrowing was a sin, you would be commanded to be a stumbling block to somebody into sin, and that's not the case. So borrowing is something we have the freedom to do, but there is nothing positive to say about that. In Scripture, it is a time, borrowing is an indicator of either great need, like in famines. The Egyptians had mortgages on their fields because of the famine. Nehemiah talked about the oppression of the lenders as people had mortgaged their possessions and their homes. They're not pretty sights, and so that would have been good to make the point even stronger in your papers. Now that was in the special assignment. Now for the paper, good counseling approaches, the content of what you were sensitive to, the kinds of questions you were asking, the data gathering you were doing, the encouragement you gave them was good. The homework assignments you gave them was pretty good. Could have been a little more specific, but good material that you chose. I especially loved those that included specific resources on web pages within Dave Ramsey, Compass, or Crown's web pages, because you were familiar with them, having scoured them earlier for your journal. I do want to add to make sure that you follow the rubric. The rubric called for there to be an introductory paragraph and a conclusion paragraph, and at least 2 of you, I believe, did not have an intro or a a conclusion to the paper. And that cost you. Those were worth 20% of the grade each. So be careful. Make sure you look at that rubric and see what's expected of you there, especially in that area. None of you analyzed the bankruptcy in light of Psalm 37:21. Now I realize we're going through Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, so it may be unfair for me to expect you to see this. And I did not actually count this against you that you didn't do that, but Psalm 37:21 is the most relevant scripture for talking about bankruptcy. Psalm 37:21 says, "The wicked borrows but does not repay, but the righteous is generous and gives." That is actually a proverb in the book of Psalms. And it is a proverb that sets up a range of God's will. And there's gobs of these in the wisdom books, in Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And in this case, the minimum God requires of you is if you borrow money, if you vow to pay someone back when they have loaned you money, then you will repay. It is the evil man that borrows and doesn't repay. But that's not God's best. That's God's least. That's the minimum he requires of you. If you make a vow, you keep it. And then it contrasts it with God's best financially. It said, the righteous is generous and gives. He not only doesn't borrow, he lives so much below his means, he has a surplus and is able to give it away to other people. That's God's best. So this couple, albeit strapped, and the world and even their pastor would say, oh, you need to declare bankruptcy. This is what's for you. I don't agree, except within 3 cases. One of which is when you're forced into bankruptcy. Creditors can get together and go to the court and say, he's not paying us, force him into bankruptcy. They're usually trying to get you into Chapter 13 or Chapter 11 if you're a business, which is a restructuring, at least get some smaller payment on them, and the judge writes down the debt to 30 cents on the dollar or something like that, but at least it gets the money flowing to the creditors, which is why they would force you. You don't really have a choice. If you go to the judge and say, I'm trying to do the best I can, if he disagrees, he can say, no, you're in bankruptcy, and make it happen. Second is when it's an unjust bankruptcy. I've only heard of one case like this where there was a small automobile accident and the person sued frivolously, but the judge concurred, and it was an insurmountable amount, and bankruptcy allowed you to get out from under that unjust case. Very, very rare. And then last, this is one Larry Burkett often mentioned. I struggle with it as a biblical counselor, but he said if you're mentally incapacitated because of this debt, if you're so depressed because of the seemingly unpayable debt that you can't function, that you can't get out of bed in the morning, and you can't go to work to try to earn money to pay the debt back, then bankruptcy can bring you that relief, but it doesn't biblically relieve you of the debt. You made a vow. You still need to be working towards paying it back. But at least bankruptcy will get the creditors off your back and would allow you to proceed with life. But you should see to do everything that you can to pay it back. There's a wonderful story of a man named Walt Maloon who owned the Correct Craft Boat Company, if you've heard of that boat company, who after the Vietnam War had a government contract that didn't go well and got canceled. Some might even say it was an unjust judgment, but he was held liable for millions of dollars of debt. And he spent 40 years from the Vietnam War to the early 2000s, slowly but surely paying off that debt. He just did all he could to make as much money as he could in the correct craft boat business, and at the same time minimized his lifestyle so he could make payments back on this. And then there's things to consider when you're counseling someone that goes through that, especially if a bankruptcy has been declared and you're trying to go back and pay off debts that have been under a bankruptcy declaration. You don't make monthly payments to them. That wakes the debt back up, but you do save up until you can pay it in full, and then you go pay it in full. So lots of things to consider biblically about bankruptcy that was unfair for me to expect you to know all of that, because I didn't teach it. So I didn't ding you on any points on your grades, but I did want to take advantage of this time to point that out, that if you do run into that, there's much more to think about than just what you had time to write about in this one paper. So let's look at this week. This week the topic is communications. You're going to be reading through Proverbs 16 through 31 again. You'll be reading through the fourth 20% chunk of Dr. Constable's notes, commentary. And I've got an article for you and a podcast for you, a marriage helper, and then Ken Boa's communication skills podcast. I believe it's 2 episodes, 30 to 45 minutes each to listen to. So you need to take notes while you're listening for your journaling. And then the communication.doc is Dell's written lecture. Discussion board will be about significant communication truths from Proverbs. The paper will be to explain a communications proverb that's not included in Dell's lesson. So you're going to have to hunt around in Proverbs for more communication ones than Dell covered in his summary. And the special assignment will be a confession time. Again, we do that sometimes, about a communication principle that you violated in the past, and what the consequences of that were, and what the correct actions should be, etc. And then, of course, there's your third quiz here in the fourth week, if that makes sense. So, in Dell's notes, he talks about Wayne and Karen having early marriage problems. In it, he quotes Proverbs 17:4, which says, "The beginning of strife is when one lets out water, therefore leave off contention before it is meddled with." It's a put off, put on verse from the Old Testament. Ephesians 4:29, "Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers." And he talks about fighting fair versus addressing conflicts. Then there's a case study with Jay and Tanya that have a recurring issue that they keep arguing about, and he has a whole host of proverbs here. I'm not going to read all of them, but there's a couple of good ones from Proverbs 15, verse 1. "A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." And then a couple of good Proverbs 18 ones I'm sure you've seen before, very popular in biblical counseling classes. Proverbs 18:13 says, "He that answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame on him." And then Proverbs 18:17, "He that is first in his own cause seems just, but his neighbor comes and searches him." You know, the first time you hear this one side of the story, it seems right until you hear the other side. So lots of good Proverbs in that teaching. So I believe this is all just a repeat of what I said on the previous page. The discussion board, post to the discussion board one significant truth that you have learned about communications from this lesson. And then give the reference from Proverbs from which the truth was derived. And of course, don't forget to respond to at least 2 of your classmates. That means you may have to be waiting on somebody to post theirs and keeping an eye on it on Saturday night, because there's only 4 of you in the class. For your paper, you're going to choose a proverb on communication that's not discussed in this lesson. Write out the passage with the reference and explain the principle that flows from the passage, and then present a scenario in which you would actually apply that passage. Then for your special assignment, tell of a time when you had a communication breakdown, i.e. an argument or verbal dispute, a fight with someone that you love, family member, spouse, siblings. If you're married, it must be about your spouse. If you're single, it can be about any person who's in a close relationship with you. It could be boyfriend or girlfriend. And fourth, identify at least one biblical principle that you violated, and then specify what you should have done in order to be obedient to Scripture. Next week, week 5, will be about child training. You'll be reading the last 20% chunk of Dr. Constable's notes, the child training written lecture by Dell, and the discussion board will be to respond to a statement on spanking, as you'll see in a moment. There'll be a 2-page paper that you're going to write on spanking, and the special assignment will be to explain your parents' child training philosophy with you as you remember it from when you were a kid. What was biblical about what they did and what was not biblical about what they did. And then in this 5th week, you have your 4th quiz. So you'll have Dr. Constable's notes, you'll have Dell's notes, you'll have the Proverbs themselves that you're reading again and journaling on. And then I've got some parenting videos from our training center. These videos are from about 13 years ago. So you see 53-year-old Tom teaching parenting in the discipline of the Lord. It's in 5 segments, but it was a 1-hour presentation. And then I want you to Google the word spanking to see the wide variety of Christian views on the topic of corporal punishment. And you can use your findings there that you journal about in your other assignments this week, next week. Discussion board, post your full, at least 1 paragraph, response to the following statement in the discussion board. I believe spanking is the best method God has provided for parents in the area of child discipline. And then respond to at least 2 of your classmates. For your paper, write a 2-page paper on what you believe Proverbs actually teaches about spanking. And you must let your belief come from what Scripture teaches. Do not drift into your personal opinion or your experience with it, either positive or negative. Just talk about the Scripture. Then for your special assignment, write a brief explanation of the child training techniques that your parents incorporated with you as a child. Include your thoughts on what you believe they did biblically, correctly, and what you would consider having been unbiblical. And then you'll have quiz number 4. Keep that final project in mind. You're looking for a 5 to 7 page written article on the topic of your choice from Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, and it'll focus on practical application and biblical evaluation of problem being solved, etc. Option 2 is to write this as a counseling scenario, either real or imagined, and giving the details of the case, etc. Please stick very close to the text of the scriptures that you're using. A simple exegesis with practical application for the counselee is what I'm looking for. And as always, when you're talking about a counseling case, discuss all 6 of these key elements of biblical counseling. God bless you guys. At the end of this week, we'll be halfway done with this course. Can you believe it's already been that fast? Call me or text me or email me, and I'll try to get back within 24 hours if you have any questions.